There's a lot of excitement in the industry right now about Open RAN, but what do network operators think of its potential? Well, I'm talking today to Neil McRae. He is Chief Architect and Managing Director of Architecture and Technology Solutions at BT. So welcome again, Neil. So can you tell us what is BT's Open RAN strategy and where are you in your Open RAN timeline?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we've got a specific Open RAN strategy, Ray, in the way that, you think about this as a tangible thing on its own. What we have is our network strategy, and within that, there's an access and radio strategy of which Open RAN is playing a part. And we look at Open RAN through kind of three lenses. The first is what's the business needs that we've got. So clearly, right now we are to comply with the government's high risk vendor scheme. We're out there right now swapping a lot of equipment today. That's one of our business needs. Other business needs are things like train stations, neutral host, indoor coverage, more stadium coverage, things that are not just big macro sites where right now I think it's fair to say Open RAN probably doesn't have the maturity that we need to be able to roll it out in the big macro network. The second area we look at is what can we optimize? Can we use Open RAN to help us optimize the network for capacity, for coverage, for latency? And again, we look at that in the round, and Open RAN plays a part of that. And then finally, like everyone else, what's the cost benefit or cost opportunity here that might save us some money or allow us to invest more in different ways? And that's through the three lenses that we look at Open RAN. I think right now we're probably focused on, using Open RAN in more niche areas like stadiums, like transportation hubs, indoor coverage, neutral host, and what I would call the smaller cells aspect of it rather than big macro, again because of the maturity level of it. And that's where our focus has been. We've been involved in ORAN for I think literally since it started. Our initial focus for Open RAN was more about capacity. So we've been working on a technology in BT Labs called Ultra MIMO, which is really about can you really gear up a MIMO architecture to drive even more capacity in a world where we see more and more demand for our network.
Okay, well, that all makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned the maturity of Open RAN there, and that's a constant discussion in the industry. How close is the ecosystem to delivering what BT and other operators need in terms of cost efficient and carrier grade Open RAN technology?
I think carrier grade. I think that's there today. I think some of the platforms that we see coming out are really strong, credible platforms. We've tested some of them at BT Labs, and they're pretty good. I think in terms of scale, I mentioned that we're rolling out our new network right now. That's tens of thousands of sectors, and I think that's where Open RAN is has still got more work to do. How do I really scale up to a huge network? And then we have some other legacy challenges. You hear a lot about people building a brand new network that has no legacy, which is quite easy. And of course, if you build a brand new network with no legacy, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. I mean, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. So what I'm looking for is how do I support my customers? And I'm just going to remind everybody, last week we had a phenomenal launch of the Apple iPhone with 5G. No one came into an EE store and asked about Open RAN when they were buying their iPhone. And in my mind, I'm always looking at that customer angle to everything that we're doing in the network. So as I roll out our new network, I'm looking at, okay, how can I do that not just to maintain the status quo, but to actually leapfrog and do even more than we already would have done. And I think that's where Open RAN probably isn't going to give me what I need. I've also got 2G. We have a lot of machine to machine, a lot of still subscribers with what we call good old feature phones, that actually that's all they want. They don't want a smartphone. They're not tech savvy, or they want battery life that's for emergencies, or vehicles with SIMs in them. And 2G is a really important capability for us, believe it or not. And it's for me, it's an absolute requirement that we're able to support that. And I think there's much more work to be done from the Open RAN vendors to be able to support that requirement. That's just one. There's other requirements as well, but that's just one. I mean, but the other thing I would really want to see from Open RAN, and actually not just from Open RAN, but across our industry as a whole, we've been moving in this direction of virtualization and disaggregation for some time. And at the same time, we have more concerns about the supply chain, having a good, strong supply chain. Yet more and more, we pivot to an architecture that relies upon less and less specific vendors, specifically at the semiconductor layer, but also in other components and other software. And what I would like to see is, on the whole, Open RAN and indeed telco supply chain on every network component, I would like to see us be as focused about the software and virtualization, where we are really focused today, to also being focused on actually how do we get a good selection of semiconductors and chipsets? How do we get some really good supply chain on power and power efficiency? And in the 5G network in particular, power is a big issue for us, because to light the sort of spectrum that we're needing takes up a huge amount of power, and we want to be power efficient. And certainly, in BT, we're driving down power usage year on year. So today, we've got some aspects of what we need, and that's great. But if we really want this to be the big thing that I think we're all excited about, I think we really need to spread our wings over much more of the core technology, semiconductors, material science, and also the other big issue around RAN deployment. Building RAN is expensive. You've got to go up and turn up to lots of sites. When you go to a site, you've got a truck roll that costs you money. Anything that we can do to reduce the truck rolls and build out quicker and faster is also super important, and can be as much as the equipment itself. And again, Open RAN's on that path, but I think we need to see much more come out of it. And ultimately, as I mentioned at the start, how do we be really sure that this is giving the customer what he wants? And when I look at our customers, the insatiable demand for high quality video, for communication services that work wherever they are, really means that the other thing we absolutely have to have in any network now is much more of a view of what is the customer's experience, what are they seeing, and is Open RAN or any other device in the network adding to that experience or taking away from it, and what can we do? So, a lot of many things, and I think right now there's an over focus perhaps on the virtualization aspects, the software aspects, the automation aspects of the virtualization, which again is important, but there's so much more that we need to spread our wings on.
So a great perspective there, Neil. So what you're talking about there in terms of what's happening in Open RAN and what you need to see from the broader ecosystem, how indicative is that of what BT and other operators need across their entire networks? And you mentioned power specifically there, power requirements. What do you need next from the vendor ecosystem? What needs to come down the line first in terms of this broader disaggregation move?
Yeah, I think probably two things, right? I think the first thing is making this whole platform as simple to deploy as possible. You know, soup to nuts. When you're standing a lot of this technology up, it's very complex. There's a lot of moving parts, and by the very nature, you're disaggregating, so you're pulling things apart and mixing and matching them. So you're going to see that. But I think overall, we're seeing, there's not enough standardization around some of the way those parts work. And I'm not saying we need to go out and create a new set of standards. I don't think we do. But I think what we definitely don't want to do is create new ways of doing things that aren't really adding value. And then I think the other aspect I'd like to see following on from that is how do we really get much more cloud native, where we're kind of running applets around different parts of the network. You know, it could be SON, could be an applet, and actually the device just needs to be able to talk to the cloud and grab onto that applet and then do its thing. How do we get more of that? How do we accelerate that? I think we're on a great path towards that, and our new 5G core is cloud native. So we're really keen to see all the ecosystem move in that direction. I think the second thing is, I think power efficiency and sustainability is such an important issue for us in the whole technology space. So building things that are power efficient, using new materials that enable power efficiency, having interesting designs that allow us to cool things or to build things in a way that doesn't drive up the cost of cooling or the environmental costs. I think some of them we probably don't think enough about. And in a world where we might one of the architectures around RAN is to kind of have this cloud RAN where more of the functions are based in data centers. Is that really the most sustainable way of building this? Because I'm very uncertain about that. And in a world where we're going to have more and more devices and perhaps much more intelligence in the radio unit itself, do we need to rethink that balance to have more silicon, more semiconductor capability, more chipset in the radio so it can optimize and could do things like parallel processing, which in MIMO is super important. So I'd like to see us focus on that. At the moment, there's a real focus. Well, we've virtualized the baseband unit. Job's done. Hell no, the job's barely begun. There's a lot more that we need to do to really make Open RAN the vision that I think we all have for it, and to then use Open RAN as a kind of a leapfrog to other parts of the network, where we can take what we learn from Open RAN and then build it out, perhaps into fiber construction, perhaps into core networking, perhaps into security and firewalls as well. So, I think still a lot to do. For me, a big Open RAN deployment in BT looks like, 3 or 4 years away. We are running a number of trials at BT Labs in some of the use cases that I mentioned. But I think this, scaling up, being power efficient, having the right balance of capability between what's centralized and what's on the radio, I think is still a big debate that will happen over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And you mentioned there as well standards and specifications. How are these kind of developments changing that landscape? What does this mean for the kind of standards, processes, and specifications that a company like BT might adhere to or might look for from the industry? Are things changing there?
I think they are changing for sure, Ray. I don't think they're changing quickly enough. I'm a believer of the old internet adage, which is write code and gain consensus. Too often we're arguing about a spec that's on a piece of paper that isn't even real. So one of the things I see coming from Open RAN, which I think is fantastic, is the fact that hey, we've created this, it works. We're going to use this as perhaps the first de facto standard, and then we can engineer around it if we have to, or we can redesign it. I really believe that we need to get back to a world where we're not waiting for a standard, but we're creating the standard as we build, and that's very much where I think Open RAN and a lot of new cloud technology is focused, so that we're able to get to market quickly, and we know that it will work between different. We need a phone here in the UK that will work in America and Japan and around the world, and we need to have those standards for sure to make that work. But I don't think we need to wait till the last minute. We can develop, write the code, test it, and say, okay, this works as a standard. So I really want to wait. Those people that are writing the code and coming up with the solutions, they're the heroes in this space for me, as opposed to a kind of a table of features and functions that we kind of work to the lowest common denominator on. Those days are done, in my view, and it's not that the people there aren't great people and trying to do the right thing. They are. They work very hard. But I want to, for me, I want to pivot to be standards driven out of innovation, because we've done it rather than waited for the standard.
Yeah, and I feel that there's a lot of other people thinking the same way in the industry. And in terms of innovation, all of these developments, can this all be a catalyst for startup innovation in the telecoms industry again? And are there new ways in which the industry, including the network operators, can support startups in maybe a different way to what's happening right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and listen, I look at the UK as a marketplace where we're as a country, for a minute, we're not in that space, but actually when you look at across our capabilities, we've got a lot of the technology being built for other applications that we could pivot towards Open RAN, semiconductors, energy management, power efficiency. We're a massive software engineering house here in the UK. I think that that generates absolutely a market for startups, but going to raise funding for a telecom startup is pretty challenging today. In fact, it's almost impossible, although some people still manage it. I think that's probably where we need some government support, and we need some industry support to rally around these new organizations and help them become all they can be. Very difficult in terms of how do you do that, because you got to think about competition law, you've got to think about regulation, you've got to think about investing and realizing some might not work, some might not make it, and those are all different ways of working. But I think they're crucial to us. I think we have to figure out how we step into that world more than we are today. And at the flip side of it, how do we ensure that these companies that do become successful, these new startups that do create innovation, don't then get swallowed up by the big guys, never to be seen again? And I think if you look at, particularly in radio and mobile, the number of companies that have been acquired over the years, and then, the technology they were working on just never made it beyond the acquisition. It's too high, Ray. We need much more of that technology actually making it to market. And we need to consider a much more, level playing field across the whole industry that allows those startups to be successful, and allows the openness of Open RAN really to come out, to enable them to be successful. And when I think about some of our requirements in power efficiency, when I think about some of the requirements in semiconductors, that's not an easy thing to achieve. But I think it's going to be crucial. I'd like to see. It's great. We've just seen Qualcomm come much bigger into Open RAN. I think that's a great move. I'd like to see ARM. I'd like to see AMD. There's a whole bunch of other NVIDIA. There's a whole bunch of other semiconductor companies I'd love to see come into this space. There's a whole bunch of companies on power management, power efficiency that I'd love to see come into this space. But we've all got to be able to make a return out of it at the end of the day. And as I always remind my colleagues in Open RAN, what's the customer view of this? How does this benefit our customer? How is this giving our customer what they need to run their lives from day to day? So I think there's huge opportunity there. I think it's an exciting time. And it probably is wider than Open RAN. It probably also encompasses many other areas of telecommunications and probably technology overall. Let me give you an example of that. So we have the big hyperscalers, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, all of which are fantastic partners of BT. They're moving in a direction where they want us to put more and more of our capability into their cloud. With three cloud suppliers, is that enough for us? Are we making the same mistake that we maybe made with radio suppliers? I think we need to think very carefully about that.
Absolutely, Neil. Thanks very much. So many different angles and different topics to explore here, and we'll be doing that, of course, on TelecomTV, and be looking for you to contribute as ever your great insights. So thanks very much, Neil. Great to talk to you again today.
Thanks, Ray.